Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined today by the Gold Star Gamers, who are holding pictures of their parents who passed while in the service of their country. Gold Star Gamers is a Colorado-based nonprofit with a mission to help children who suffered the loss of a military parent find hope and healing through gaming. Please stand as I read the roll call of the men and women ruggers from our military family who have made the ultimate sacrifice. From the United States Army, Major Guy Baratieri, Lieutenant James Brearley, Lieutenant Ben Britt, Lieutenant Randy Castro, Lieutenant Dimitri Del Castillo, Chief Warrant Officer Nicholas Demona, Lieutenant Joey Emai, Sergeant First Class Michael Fuga, Sergeant First Class Justin Goff, Staff Sergeant Robert Goodwin, Specialist Ryan Grandstaff, Lieutenant Chris Greer, Captain Jim Gerbitz, Specialist Christopher Harris, Colonel James Harrison, Lieutenant Chuck Hemingway, Lieutenant Haley Hodson, Captain John David Hortman, Sergeant Brett Jabot, Lieutenant Colonel Dale Jensen, Captain Quincy Johnson, Sergeant Donald James Lamar, Sergeant James Landreth, Lieutenant Weston Lee, Staff Sergeant Jeff Loa, Lieutenant David Lodwick, Sergeant Terry Lynch, Lieutenant Tom Martin, Corporal Stephen Michael McGowan, Lieutenant Zach Miller, Specialist Avelau Milo, Sergeant First Class Matthew Nyman, Lieutenant Bill Pahisa, Lieutenant David Sackett, Sergeant First Class John Sanchez, Captain Bob Sirio, Specialist Cody Sisk, Captain Christian P. Skoglin, Captain Garrett C. Slaughter, Major Robert Soltez, Captain Scott Spaniel, Chief Warrant Officer 2 Chris Thibodeau, Lieutenant Claire Thurston, Sergeant First Class Frank Tiai, Lieutenant Laura Walker, Staff Sergeant Kyle Ray Warren, Captain Ian Weichel, Corporal Matthew James Wargo. From the United States Marine Corps, Major Dan Engeloff Jr., Sergeant Bronson Babcock, Lieutenant Colonel Brett Becken, Lance Corporal Richard Burstetta, Lieutenant Colonel Justin Constantine, Lance Corporal Chris Cosgrove III, Lance Corporal Michael Glover, Major Jeremy Grazik, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Green, Major Ryan Hansen, Lance Corporal Eric Hersberg, Sergeant Christopher Jacobs, Sergeant Donald Lamar II, Sergeant Aaron Lawson, Major John Lee, Captain John Maloney, Staff Sergeant Joshua Moore Jr., Major Kevin Nave, Corporal Ron Payne, Gunnery Sergeant Kat Pelletier, Captain Michael Quinn, Captain Patrick Rapicol, Captain Candace Ruiz, Major John Rucco, Staff Sergeant Joshua Sanchez, Sergeant Adam Scholler, Staff Sergeant Andrew Seif, Lieutenant Christopher Shea, Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Shea, Corporal Jared Shoemaker, Lance Corporal Keontae Snow, Staff Sergeant Josh Stone, Major Keith Takabayashi, Corporal Tyler Trevelyan, Staff Sergeant Alan Walker, Corporal Matthew Wargo, Staff Sergeant Jeremy Woodruff, Major Alan Ziegler. From the United States Navy, Lieutenant Jared Allen, Lieutenant Commander Tom Blake, Lieutenant Glenn Campbell, Hospital Corpsman John Freilish, Lieutenant Brian Hoke, Lieutenant Junior Grade Nick Giron, Lieutenant Jason Kreuter, Lieutenant James Merrill, Gunner's Mate Sean Michael Pussian, Gunner's Mate Luke Rimo, Lieutenant James Search, Lieutenant Wes Van Dorn, Ensign Van Wilson. From the United States Air Force, Colonel Dick Baddock, Luis Arauz Chang, Captain Scott Craven, Captain Patrick Flanagan, Lieutenant Colonel Vernon Francis, Lieutenant Colonel Greg Giletti, Captain Nicholas Jose Gowiri-Golzari, Lieutenant Alan Hooks, Lieutenant Wes Kissel, Lieutenant Colonel Hank Knellinger, Lieutenant James Merrill, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Morales, Captain Victoria Pinkney, Lieutenant Laura Piper, Major Adriana Vorderbruggen. And from the United States Coast Guard, Seaman Sean Debenport, Marine Science Technician John Lewis, Captain John Miller, Lieutenant Paul Perlt, Commander Mike Smith, Captain Douglas Whitmer. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the national anthem of the United States of America. That concludes our tribute to the fallen military ruggers. They and their families must never be forgotten. Thank you.